Welcome to the Carasoft Data Center Innovation Series, where we take a close look at the tech, trends, and issues shaping the future of data centers in the public sector. I'm your host, Carasoft Consulting CTO Scott Robon. Today, we have two incredibly knowledgeable guests with us from Vast Data to share their view of what's happening in data center innovation. They are Jeff Denworth, co-founder of Vast Data, and Randy Hayes, vice president of public sector at Vast Data Federal. Jeff and Randy have a great mix of deep and broad engagement commercially and across the public sector. We'll be touching on the importance of data quality, federal AI adoption challenges and opportunities, the emerging AI ecosystem, and much, much more. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Thanks for being with us today. As we get started, could each of you give our listeners a brief intro, your history in the data center world and your role? And Jeff, let's start with you and give us a little background on Vast as well.
Sure. Okay. So I'm Jeff Denworth, co-founder of Vast Data. As a background, Vast is now a 9-year-old company that is building what we call the operating system for AI. We very much focus in the infrastructure space, and what we're building is a next generation full stack solution that encompasses all of the storage that a customer may need to go and deploy for capturing and logging all sorts of activities related to AI data processing, the databases associated with contextualizing all of the data that comes in from all these different sensors and data sources, and using AI tools to understand them. And then thirdly, the compute layer that's required to basically go and refine the data and then serve that refined data product to different consumers in the form of AI agents and reasoning models that can be deployed from the platform. So as I mentioned, we're in our 9th year. Vast is regarded as one of the hottest companies in the space, recently tracked on Forbes AI 50 list for 2025, 50 most influential private AI companies, CNBC Disruptor of the year, one of the 50 that they kind of call in that category. Growing like a weed, and have managed to build a pretty spectacular and very fun business.
Excellent. Consistent with all my observations from the outside. So very good. Randy, how about you?
Sure. Randy Hayes, Vice President of Public Sector. This is my 4th or 5th kind of early stage company that I brought into the federal government. We're obviously much further along than that in the past. And so have some good experience around bringing newer technologies into the federal government. And so, Carasoft's been a great partner for that as well. So doing a lot of those interesting joint collaborations from a Carasoft marketing and contracts perspective has been fantastic. I think the thing that's really interesting, and I didn't truly appreciate it until maybe 4 or 5 years ago when we started building our federal team in earnest. I was also employee 38, something like that, but it was the first sales guy in the company. And so I had a relationship with the founders and the CEO and, head of product and engineering. And it allowed us to build a product that checks all the boxes for federal. NIH was our second ever customer. So we've been selling to the federal government since the beginning. And I think that's a really interesting delineation point around a lot of the other kind of AI companies that are out there that are trying to come into the federal market. We've done all the hard work. We've done all the security. We've done all of these different things. And that relationship that I have with the founders, most head of federal, they just don't have. They come in later. Federal's an afterthought. Hey, let's go figure this out. And I find that to be so helpful for our federal customers because we were able to build a product that was not only secure, but also auditable. And, if you think about just the general federal government, they love to regulate things, and they're going to regulate AI. And so we've built all the capabilities inside that, in the operating system in order to show traceability and auditability and all of these type of things. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of just, kind of broad brush on me. Been working with the federal government for 20 plus years, and been working with Caresoft for basically as long as it's been around. So.
Well, we certainly appreciate the relationship with Vast, and having you both here today, I think, falls squarely under the dual use, frame of view, right? Where important commercial technologies can be adapted directly for federal government public sector use. I think you guys bring great examples of that. I think it's appropriate to start the conversation around data quality for AI readiness, right? The attention, the oxygen in the room is all being taken up by training and agents today. But a few years ago, data science was the cooler job title to have. And as far as I can tell, data quality is still really important. Where do you guys want to start on tackling that topic? What's your view on making sure the data is in good shape for training and usage?
Maybe I can start on that one, Scott. Yeah, usage. Okay, so this is like a super wide spectrum, we kind of view three different subcomponents of the kind of the spectrum of AI computing that some customers will have to deal with. Most won't have to deal with all three. So you have model training, right? And here, this is anymore being taken up by organizations that have very specific objectives, where the models that are largely out in the open can't necessarily be applied to what they're trying to accomplish, and so they endeavor to go and train a new model. And there, the need for very high quality data sets is off the charts. You can kind of see that through the evidence of Scale AI being half invested in by Meta now for $14 billion. It's just a kind of crazy numbers being thrown around right now in the space. But then you have two other aspects of AI pipelines that pretty much everybody will be dealing with. In one case, you have the deployment of existing models that you basically fine tune for different purposes, and then you have the application of those models for inference or agentic purposes. And what happens at the latter part is that you have this kind of data flywheel or continuous loop of improvement that starts to emerge as you infer more, you capture some of that data, use that to inform the next fine tuning of a model, and this process goes on and on. And so I think that for most part, very very few organizations will actually go and endeavor to train a model from the ground up. I met with the head of AI at an extremely large global 10 bank the other day, and they said, we're never going to train our own model. It's not even a thing that's going to happen. But they will fine tune the hell out of a bunch of different models that they can get their hands on.
Sure.
So then the question becomes, well, how do you ensure quality to that? And up until now, it's been an extremely laborious and manual process, but I think that is actually starting to change really quickly. And the chart that I love to use is when OpenAI's O3 model was introduced, what you had is two axes on a chart, and on one you had intelligence, and the other you had cost per task. And what you could see is that as you went from O1 to O3, you could observe that not only did the cost per task increase, but the intelligence shot up over the span of last year almost by 200%. And so play this forward now, that came out in 2024. Play this forward in 2025. There are companies and tools that are starting to emerge that can do data curation and data engineering using AI capabilities in a way that you didn't have previously. So it could be said that AI is now creating AI, and that you now have systems and mechanisms that can just feed these new fine-tuning and training processes in ways that you didn't have before. And so, the thing that you have to think about is, okay, this is a point in time in 2025, but if you go out 1 or 2 more years, you can assume that these new data engineering AIs will be capable of understanding all the data relevance and all the data recency that they need to basically either manufacture or synthesize data when you don't have a valid and capable data set, or just go and curate whatever data collection that you've created. So it's going to be a crazy world on this topic, but I don't think there's going to be any lack of high quality data going forward.
And that recursion makes sense, right? We're going to use the new tools that are developed to help clean up and organize the data, just like you say. So yeah, I think there is good reason to be hopeful. Randy, are you seeing any particular impact of that in the federal space?
Well, I think one of the bigger challenges that the federal government is going to have is we are going to have adversarial countries that are going to try and poison the data, and they're going to try and skew a lot of the models that are being built, and skew a lot of the data, right? Because if you can poison the data and you could change the percentages or the weights and biases that are in these things, you can now push an agenda external of the United States to a direction that you want it to go. So I think being able to audit and see who's touching what data when, both from a human and artificial perspective, right? And so, I have just finished fourth grade, and I, always joke, she's, doing math, like, you got to show your work, right? In elementary school. Well, it's going to be the same thing with AI. You're going to have to show how you came to these conclusions, especially if you're doing targeting or, any sort of things that the military is going to do. And if you look at, the big beautiful bill that got passed on 4th of July, a lot of what's funded is AI and autonomous systems in a massive way. And so we're going to have to keep an eye on all of that information and how the data is getting trained and all of those things. And so, I'll give you a really easy commercial example. You have a lot of autonomous cars now. Tesla obviously being the forefront, but I rented a Volvo the other day, on vacation, and it kind of drives itself pretty well as well. And they all have pictures, sensors, all these things. And so if you get in a car crash, and you're going to blame it on an autonomous vehicle, those car makers are going to want to prove you wrong, right? And say, hey, you were doing something wrong, whatever it might be. But I think it's going to be the same thing in the federal government side, where people are going to want to make sure they understand, that there's always a human in the loop per se. But, to the same notion, there's a lot of things that don't need a human in the loop, especially a lot of these repetitive tasks, whether it's cybersecurity, especially defensive. So I think there's some really interesting plays that the federal government's going to really lean into, especially looking at, kind of what's getting funded over the next couple of years. You can at least see where the current administration's priorities are going. But
Sure.
Getting back to just auditability, I mean, we audit everything and we give you that, I like to call it a self-licking ice cream cone, because it also creates a lot of information that you also have to store. But it's I think that's probably one of the most interesting things that we've done is we've over-rotated on security because it matters.
I don't think there can be over rotation on security here. And my view for the tech market for 35 years is there's a product management life cycle that kind of goes like this. Step one is get it to work. Step two is figure out how to manage it. And then step 79 is let's secure it. So moving that way up above step 79 is a really good thing. I mean, yes, of course, you could over-rotate on security. Sorry, that was a bit pejorative, but it's good news from my perspective.
No, it is. And, we really built out, the amount of security that's in the product is just, it's bar none. We just finished up DOD and APL certifications, and so that's all coming out. So definitely some really interesting things. I have some skeptics on my team that are like, this is the most secure thing we've ever seen. So definitely from zero trust perspective as well. Zero trust came out and I was like, oh man, this is going to be another IPv6. People are going to get waivers till the end of time. But the government's really leaning in on the zero trust stuff, and so we check all those pillars as well. Kind of all the pieces on that. So definitely, we not only can we do it, we can also prove it, right? Which I think is half the battle, especially when it comes to AI. GI Joe, right? Knowing is half the battle.
Right. Yep. Yep.
The other 25% is red lasers, and the other 25 is blue lasers.
Very good. Well, let me steer this back to a comment you made, Jeff, in your introduction and the concept of the operating system for AI. Can you tease that out for us a little bit? Like bring that down to the next level of how you view that holistic system for AI.
Sure. Yeah, it's a little bit abstract, so it does require a little bit of explaining, and maybe the history of the company would help here a little bit. So we started the business 9 years ago in 2016 with an idea to build a new type of distributed system. And it's true that storage and database companies come in and out of the market fairly regularly, but new systems architectures only get introduced on a generational basis. And at the time, what we realized is that there would be a path to building a new type of system that broke a ton of trade-offs. And these related to all sorts of different dimensions that today we bring products out to market with. So, the first product that we brought out to market was a data storage system. We said, okay, the storage system should be kind of highly disruptive in and of itself. We wanted to build a system that could scale completely linearly to whatever level of customer data collection and processing that they might endeavor to do. And build an architecture that allowed for customers to consolidate all the different tiers of storage that they have in their environment into a single system. We called it universal storage at the time. And so the single tier gives you the scale of the most scalable infrastructure in the world, the performance of the fastest systems in the world, and the costs of an archive, so that people never have to choose how to prioritize their data on infrastructure because there's no compromise. And that was the genesis of a broader product idea where we basically wanted to unlock access to all of a customer's data. And so with that, we got into the file system space, and now the system can support very scalable file systems, as well as object storage, and you can even build block storage on this platform. And you basically have the best of all capabilities: scale, simplicity, cost, and performance. And so with that, the objective was to build a platform that organizations could just capture mostly all of their unstructured data into a single system that we felt was really instrumental to not only the training wave of AI, but also the inference wave of AI. Like take, for example, a sensor that's just streaming in, let's say, like multi-int data, that needs to be understood by AI platforms. So if you can do that in real time at any level of scale, that was like a big win for us. So we started there. That was the early basis of success. We kind of introduced to customers that they could get a 10x advantage versus the legacy systems that they were buying. And then about 3.5 years ago, we started working on a database that sat in that same system, a database that that also is aimed at breaking trade-offs. You could build something that has the streaming performance of the world's fastest streaming system, so great for data ingestion from all around the world. When you query on this, everything's flash optimized, and what we realized is that there's a ton of unrealized benefit that the data science market hadn't reached for because they had never optimized for flash. And if you do that, you can really accelerate query time. So now we have the world's fastest data warehouse from an analytical perspective, and it has the scale and the cost point of a data lake. And so customers, again, get all these nice capabilities: scale, performance, linear ingestion, real-time analytics across any of their data. And then we just added vectors as a data type that's really important for as people start to build RAG pipelines, or retrieval augmented generative AI pipelines. And so these RAG pipelines basically can take unstructured data, create some context out of them in the form of what's called an embedding, and then store that in a vector database, where vector databases can be used for looking up associated data, which is great, obviously, for finding bad guys. But then the question that we ask ourselves is, what's that thing that takes the data from being an unrefined product to a refined product? And that's why we added a compute engine on top of the system. So now you can run your own functions in the system. There's eventing infrastructure that will trigger an event, maybe a processing event when something new happens in the system. And the first solution that we put on top of that is actually a RAG engine. We call it Insight Engine. And so now you can basically have these unstructured data streams come in and they instantaneously get enriched and contextualized and then served to other Gen AI tools. And then the other one that we announced a few weeks ago is called Agent Engine. So you can deploy full set of agents natively within the system using a low-code studio. And these agents can all be observed. And over time, we'll build in these kind of data flywheel capabilities that I talked about earlier, where everything can be self-improving. And so, so this is a platform that you can deploy on premises, you can deploy in public cloud, you can federate everything across these different environments. And we looked at it and said, well, what's a system that goes all the way down to bare metal, has a storage and file system layer, an index, a runtime, event infrastructure, and an SDK so that you can just easily deploy applications on it? That's an operating system, but an operating system not for like your phone or your laptop, rather an operating system you can deploy at a data center that's like, $1 billion worth of GPUs, and then connect all of your data centers that have that level of scale and complexity.
So is it fair to call this a full stack solution? Not to lump it in with too many other things in the market, but you're taking a pretty comprehensive approach, it sounds like.
I think, full stack is always in the eye of the beholder. One of the things that we always focused on is not being a service provider, which is a little bit of a complication for certain customers that we engage with, but it's also a huge benefit for other customers because we're never the data custodian, we're never the data steward, and so we can't get a subpoena. When we, Randy mentioned we have DODIN certification. That's really easy when we're just delivering software to customers that they can deploy within their own four walls. And so whether that's in a VPC in the public cloud or whether that's in your data center, we're never going to actually be the data owner. It's not a SaaS service in so much. And so is that full stack? I don't know. Are we offering a full suite of applications on top like Palantir? No. So I think of us as building the scaffolding for very scalable AI, and we try to draw the line at that level.
That quote will make it into a summary, the scaffolding for AI. That's really useful. Randy, I'm going to flip this back to you. You've got this construct and messaging now. How is that helping you in your federal and public sector engagements? Where is this resonating? Where do you see it getting traction?
Sure. So if you think about all the things that Jeff, he added a lot of things, right? Storage, file, object, analytic database, runtime, all of these things. And in the current mode of the government, they need to do more with less. And we've been selling efficiency since the beginning of the company. I think that's probably one of the things that has really stood out over the last, let's call it 7 months. Because if you think about, there's less people to do the same or more work. And so when you start looking at what we have been selling since the beginning, it was collapsing all of your tiers of storage down onto a single platform, something that's easy to manage, easy to support, will run wherever you want it to run, whether it's public cloud, a colo facility or your own data center. I think one of the challenges that the federal government's going to struggle with is if you look at how much power and cooling the GPUs need, it is going to be very difficult for the federal government to retrofit a lot of these data centers. And so they're looking for other options in order to do this. And so some of that's in the public cloud, some of that is in colos, some of that is kind of as a service. And as Jeff mentioned, we don't do like quote unquote as a service. However, we allow lots of integrators to do as a service, right?
Sure.
And so I think that's one of the things that we've really seen a big uptick in is the Lockheeds and the Raytheons and the Northrops and the GDs. They're going to compete with some of the public clouds as much as they use the public clouds moving forward, especially for data that's a little trickier to get into the public clouds. And so that's where we've seen kind of at least the initial big implementations are in places that either have already been building at scale systems. So you think about large supercomputing facilities like Oak Ridge or Lawrence Livermore. We just had a press release with NERSC over, I think it was Thursday or Friday last week around, they're basically building one of the biggest GPU clusters in the federal government, if not the largest GPU cluster. And we're sitting behind that, supporting them from a quality file system. And so definitely some interesting things on that. We've also seen a lot of the people that historically would be doing high performance computing are now also doing and leading the charge on a lot of the AI workloads.
Sure.
But we're starting to see kind of this, like, I would say, mesh of what historically would be like business intelligence that you would see in like a Databricks or Snowflake or something like this. But typically those data sets are really small. It's just very small data sets. Whereas now when you start looking at AI, they're massive data sets, right? And so you're talking about, not terabytes of data, you're talking about exabytes of data. And so if you look at like what XAI is building, if you look at what OpenAI, Meta, you're talking about multiple exabytes of information that they're trying to process. And so, I always joke, where are the most valuable companies? They're the ones that have all of your data, right? And the federal government probably has more data than all of them. But the problem is it's all siloed and it's all very fiefdom. And it's like, this is my data. You can't see it. And so I think that's one of the really interesting things from a VAST perspective is we can now, build this global namespace, but have the auditability and the security so that people can still retain, the security of their own data, but it can be used by a lot more people in order to, generate, a bunch of different things. I mean, think about like agentic AI from a federal government. Think about the agencies that have a lot of public to private conversations back and forth, right? Maybe that's TSA, maybe that's CBP,
Sure.
maybe that's ICE. This seems to be pop up quite a bit, right? IRS, Social Security, these places that interact with the public, I think is where you're going to see the first runs from an agentic perspective. At least that's what we're starting to see, and that's what we're starting to understand. If you look at the budget, it's where a lot of money's going towards.
You want to see it in action, right? And I think the thing that helped agentic AI click for me is agents have agency. They can do things. And they really impact workflows and how work gets done. And I think there's like basic thought around workflow that needs to go along with all these changes to like understand what your business processes look like today, or mission processes, right, in a federal context, and see how do I automate what I'm doing, but how can I also do it better, do it differently, enabled by different agents that can do different things. Jeff, you're seeing a big commercial view of this, and it's part of your bigger vision. What do you think what are we going to expect in the next 12 to 18 months on the advance of agentic AI?
So the amazing thing is that if you get in a time machine and you go back a year ago, nobody was talking about this at all. It's really only been possible by having multi-turn reasoning models that
Right.
that can actually think through and achieve complex tasks. So we see a few things. Excuse me. The first is inevitably whenever I talk to let's call it a company or customer that is in the information business, that may be a bank or that may be a retailer or something like that. The comment always comes back that the business is going full agentic going forward. Now, I almost always interpret that as that they're trying to accelerate the pace of business without linearly scaling their headcount. Right? And so efficiency is the name of the game. And so what does that look like at scale? Well, very few organizations have actually put a yardstick out there that says, here's what we're aiming for, but there are a few that are actually out there. We've seen a few businesses that have already deployed over 1 million agents, which is, obviously an extreme amount of AI infrastructure deployment and associated tooling that goes along with that. NVIDIA, and Jensen both makes a lot of the Kool-Aid and drinks it himself, but NVIDIA is aiming at 100 million agents for an organization that over the next few years should be maybe about 50,000 employees.
Hmm.
So what you're talking about there is a 2,000 to 1 agent to employee ratio, and imagine the business efficiencies that can come from that, and the pace of the business that NVIDIA could achieve if they do this. I mean, it's absolutely spectacular, and we're working with them, and we see the efforts that are undergoing, and it is becoming real very quickly. And so the really interesting thing for us is that the conversion from fine tuning and training, in particular inference, and then agentic inference, is that AI is transforming from being a compute bound problem where you just need to scale up a number of machines to kind of determine the right weights from some training data set that you created, to a data processing problem where now the agents, as they have to achieve a certain objective, they have to go out all sorts of different auxiliary information to get an answer to the question. And so let's play it out and say, okay, you've got 1 million or 10 million agents running in your organization. You're going to need infrastructure that is of the scale of a very large GPU supercomputer. And so the question then becomes, well, what kind of pressure does that put on my data infrastructure? And from what we've seen in the early days, it's quite intense. And so my general perspective is that the rise of agency will create the world's most significant tech refresh event in history at the data level. And if you think about it, all these GPUs are new. That's all like greenfield. But all of the data that these GPUs now need access to is very much existing data sets that have been around for quite some time. And what we're seeing is the opposite. Organizations are now collecting more data now that it can be understood by systems. And nothing from the legacy world will be able to be carried forward if things go the way that they're looking to go.
So there's a really interesting parallel, and not to reduce it to the following, but there's an extension of the client server model here, where there will be many, many, many more endpoints processing, doing inference than there are central stores. And to these comments you've both made, they're going to be those customers that can do their own training. They can afford it. They can afford the expertise. But just like the cloud model emerged, we also have this neo cloud model emerging for heavy duty AI training services. I think it's a fascinating development. Jeff, why don't you comment on that as we wind this down, and I'll pass it back to Randy to see what he thinks about in the federal space for neo cloud type services.
So neo clouds are not just training clouds. I think that's a popular misconception. If you look at some of the contracts that CoreWeave, who's one of the public companies in the space now, they're signing, it's clear that a lot of this work is inference based and agentic in fact. So we see a few things here. One is so classic customers have a choice, right? If I take a 72 GPUs of GB200 requires you to go deploy something like 100 to 120 kilowatts per rack, right? And so the first question is, who has that type of data center infrastructure? And the answer is almost nobody that's been in the data center business more than 6 weeks, right? And so this new cloud event came to happen because of two reasons. One is customers concluded that they just don't have enough data centers ultimate power to feed these new AI engines. And as they compared against tier one CSP approaches to serving GPUs, the older and the bigger public clouds, they never really designed for compute efficiency in the way that you can get to if you build according to NVIDIA's best practices.
Sure.
So this whole other class of clouds came out that's extremely capital intensive. And they started racing to build all of this infrastructure really quickly. These organizations could move very fast. They break a lot along the way, but there's some amount of risk that's tolerable. Where I think CoreWeave, when they went public, they said, okay, for a common machine, you're going to get something like 40% better utilization out of CoreWeave versus if you go to a tier one public cloud, and not to mention the fact that the costs are different. So they could sign contracts where customers were saving anywhere between 50 to 70% versus the public cloud alternatives. And if you just have to go, that was a very savory proposition. Now, fast forward to today, the market is being overtaken by inference, and that is also the case for neoclouds, where they're all deploying their inference servers, their inference frameworks, and we're seeing even a new class of clouds emerge, where the old training clouds, you had very concentrated data centers, and you'd have anywhere between 5,000 to 100,000 GPUs maybe in one of those data centers. The new class of deployments we're seeing is a second set of clouds that are optimized just for localized inference. So, for example, we made an announcement with Akamai. Akamai has thousands of data centers, so they want to push AI all the way out to the edge, and help people lower the latency of operations that can't be run on a laptop or a phone, but you may not want to send back to some central data center. You want to keep it in region.
Right. No, a great clarification on what neoclouds can be used for. I do think that trend to push inference as far out to the edge, whether it's in those localized data centers or on equipment, on-prem, we're going to see that continue for sure. Randy, in the federal space, you ticked off the list of half a dozen SIs. What do you see for federal consumption and use here for those agencies that aren't going to be able to build their own heavy duty infrastructure? What's around the corner there?
So I think there's a couple of things that are kind of happening at the same time. I mentioned federal government likes to regulate things. And so when the cloud providers came out, they had this great idea, let's do something called FedRAMP. And then there's like this whole cottage industry around getting software companies FedRAMP certified, and you're paying millions and millions of dollars. The current administration has vowed to streamline that process. There's the 20X initiative coming out of GSA to fast track a lot of the FedRAMP certifications. And I think that was one of the challenges initially with the neoclouds, is they're like, we have enough business on the commercial side. We don't really want to deal with all of this nonsense and how long it takes to get FedRAMP certified and all of these things. And so what you started to see was the hyperscalers continue to grow their footprint in a lot of the AI services on that end. Now that, they're streamlining that process, and, allegedly it's going to be down to 3 to 6 weeks to get FedRAMP certified and be a lot less expensive versus, I'd heard anything from 10 million in 3 years to anything in between. And so I think what you're going to see is some of those neoclouds are going to start dipping their toe in the federal market.
Sure.
I think you're going to see some of the traditional HPC locations building big GPU clusters that are going to be a shared service across a much wider group of agencies. And then I also think you'll see the integrators continue to build out. I look at some of these. I don't think it's any different than like how Amazon came about, right? They built AWS to service their internal business processes. And so that's what we're seeing on the FSI side of things as well, where they've built a lot of this infrastructure to service their internal programs. And now they're going to go out and start having those conversations with other customers. And so I think there'll be, it's going to be the Wild West for probably the next 2 years would be my guess. We've seen a lot of prototypes being done in the traditional hyperscalers. And so I think what you'll see is the hyperscalers that are farthest behind AWS are going to be the ones that over rotate into the GPUs to try to take care of more of these different workloads to try and catch up with that, 800-pound gorilla or whatever analogy you want to use. from an AWS perspective. So very exciting times. But, I think one of the really interesting things, we've done some really cool work with the NHL. If you go to Vast, YouTube channel, built some really cool stuff from NHL. But the other thing that we're seeing is NHL built all of these really, really cool use cases with Vast, whether it was computer vision and being able to show advertisements and just provide a better end user experience or watching experience. And you know what the first thing they did 5 years ago? They put all their data on Vast. And so that's been a lot of our messaging to the federal government as well. Like, we know you're not quite ready to do AI, but let's get your data ready so that when you are ready to roll, your data is already stored on an extremely scalable all-flash system. We've contextualized it. We've vectorized it. We've built all of the capabilities on the back end so that when you're ready to start using this data, it's ready to roll day one. And so I think that's one of the things that we've really seen a big uptick in with our federal customers is they got to buy infrastructure anyways. Why not buy something that was purpose built for the AI moving forward so that you're ready to roll, right out the gate when your organization says, hey, here's a project, give us the data.
So there's a joke in here about how the NHL can use AI to tell us where the puck is going. Sorry, I couldn't resist, Randy.
That's
but
fair.
They actually do that, by the way.
I no doubt. And sorry for disrupting the seriousness here. I couldn't resist. This is and has been a fascinating conversation. We do need to wrap this up for today, but let's give each of you that last word on anything else you want to point out to our listeners, anything you want to emphasize before we come to a close. Jeff will ask you to go first, and then we'll end with you, Randy.
Sure. Well, the whole thing that's happening right now is just crazy. And there's a few things that we observe. One is the pace of change is moving so quickly that unpredictability is now just the constant. And so, when we work with customers, we talk about the things that we don't know and the things that we can't even know. And AI readiness then takes an entirely new shape when you have to plan for the unknown. And there's a lot that we can do to help you plan for the unknown. Number two is, I would say, a lot of people like to be really creative in this space as they start to try to solve problems that they identify. And
Sure.
if you're not really steeped in how this is done right, then things can go off the rails really quickly. And so organizations like NVIDIA have best practices. AMD has best practices. Vast has best practices. We work with those organizations and all the different networking companies like Cisco and Arista. And so what I would say is that you should definitely engage us to understand not just what the best practices are, but why they exist, because there's been basically 5 years of thinking applied to building what we know today. And if you're just starting in it, then you should leverage those realizations that we've made.
Pay attention to best practices. That's couldn't agree with you more there. Randy, you get the last word.
Jeff brought up unpredictability and unknown. Doge is a thing. The current administration is doing some very interesting things from a workforce perspective. And I think if you look at the federal government historically, people that work in the federal government as just a broad brush are generally risk adverse. It's a great job, very predictable. You work this, you get your 4 to 6%, wage increase each year. You get a retirement package. You do all of these things. And I think what's happened in the last 6 months is basically flipped that completely upside down. And so
Sure.
It's actually been a forcing function for people to look at doing things in a different way. And so I brought this up, I think, Scott, when we met a couple months back during the AI symposium at Carasoft. but
Correct.
the general thought process is there's probably 10,000 companies that have AI in their name or AI in their their webhooks. And you really want to ask them, how many AI pipelines have you deployed into who and what customers? And so, I think you really have to build with the builders, and we're built all this scaffolding underneath to support all of these customers to build some really cool applications and support some really cool use cases on the federal side. So not only on the commercial side are we seeing kind of like the bleeding edge, because we're definitely seeing the bleeding edge, but that gives our company the ability to pivot on that. And then what's, in my opinion, actually nice for our federal team is that we can see what's going on the commercial side, and we can maneuver our ways into a position that when the federal government's ready to do some of these things, we already have lessons learned. We already have all of these things, and how we've actually built out these systems. So that's what I would say. Build with builders, build with people that have done this a lot, and we have the expertise that goes both across the federal community as well as the commercial. And appreciate the time and appreciate the partnership from Carahsoft. You guys have been just amazing to work with for the number of years that we've been working together. So much appreciated.
Well, we appreciate it as well. And I like the way that you've kind of both given two sides of the same coin with paying attention to best practices. We're not starting from zero and build with the builders, right? You're kind of saying the same thing in two different ways, right? You've got access to expertise of people who know what we've learned in the industry over the last 5+ years and much longer for all the technologies that feed into this. If you want to follow up on what you heard today, listener, please reach back to us at Carahsoft. We'll be happy to put you in touch with Vast for follow-up and more detailed conversation. Randy, I really do appreciate our conversation back at the AI and Government Day a few months back. I hope we'll have you both back at more things at Carahsoft, and let's flag 12 months out. We can have a revisit of this conversation with both of you and see how much has emerged and how things have changed, because we know they will have changed 12 months from now. But thanks again. Really appreciate you being here. And listeners, thanks for tuning in. Be on the lookout for more episodes coming in the Carahsoft Data Center Innovation Series. Thank you, and talk to you next time.